Hey leader, and welcome to another episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast, where we are obsessed with helping you grow to your maximum potential and to maximize the impact of your leadership. My name is Doug Smith, and I am your host, and today's episode is brought to you by my friends at Baritone Advisors. We also recorded this episode live from the new Return.com studio. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here, and I hope that you'll enjoy our content and become a subscriber. Know that you can also watch all of our episodes over on our YouTube channel, so make sure you're subscribed there as well. And as always, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while and it's made an impact on your life, it would mean the world to me if you would leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. That really does help us to grow our audience and reach more leaders, so thank you in advance for that. Well, leader, in today's episode, you'll hear my conversation with Dan Miller. If you're unfamiliar with Dan, let me just tell you a little bit about him. Dan is the author of the widely acclaimed 48 Days to the Work and Life That You'll Love, No More Dreaded Mondays, Wisdom Meets Passion, and An Understanding Heart. He hosts a weekly podcast that is consistently ranked number one under careers on Apple Podcasts, and he's also a frequent speaker at conferences including Social Media Marketing World, Podcast Movement, New Media Europe, Launch, and his own 48 Days events. He also has an online community with over 1,100 active Eaglepreneurs. Dan and his wife of 55 years, Joanne, live in Osprey, Florida, where they enjoy old car shows, long walks on the beach, and plenty of time for art and creativity. They have 3 grown children, along with 16 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren all across the country, from Florida to Colorado to California. And in our conversation, you'll hear Dan talk all about how you can find the work and life that you love in 48 days. But before we dive into that, just a few announcements. This episode of the L3 Leadership Podcast is sponsored by Baritone Advisors. The financial advisors at Baritone Advisors help educate and empower clients to make informed financial decisions. You can find out how Baritone Advisors can help you develop a customized financial plan for your financial future by visiting their website at baritoneadvisors.com. That's BERATUNG advisors.com. Securities and investment products and services offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA and SIPC. Baritone Advisors, LPL Financial, and L3 Leadership are separate entities. I also want to thank our sponsor, Henny Jewelers. They're a jeweler owned by my friend and mentor, John Henny. And my wife, Laura, and I got our engagement and wedding rings through Henny Jewelers and had an incredible experience. And not only do they have great jewelry, but they also invest in people. In fact, for every couple that comes in engaged, they give them a book to help them prepare for marriage. And we just love that. So if you're in need of a good jeweler, check out hennyjewelers.com. And I also want to thank our new sponsor, Return.com. And leader, let me just ask you this. Have you ever had an interest in investing in real estate? Well, now for as little as $500, you can become a commercial real estate investor. Just visit Return.com to learn more. That's REITURN.com. Investing involves risk. Please consult the Return Offering Circular if you're interested in investing. And with all that being said, let's dive right in. Here's my conversation with Dan Miller. Dan Miller, welcome to the L3 Leadership Podcast. I'm so excited. As I was just talking to you, you've been on my bucket list for quite some time, and I'm glad we finally got to make this happen. And I really just want to start with, you're known as America's expert on helping people find work and do work that they love, and not just find it and do it, but do that in 48 days. Can you give us a little bit context of how you do that and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I love doing the work that I do. I've been doing it for a long time, helping people find that sweet spot that's a combination of talent, passion, and money. But the 48 days really came around pretty much by accident. I like to say that there was some scientific process where we did a 20-year-long study to prove that. No, not at all. It was just a marketing ploy that I used years ago when I was starting this, just coming out of a Sunday school class where I was teaching these principles. And it was back when 48 Hours was becoming popular as a TV show. And I was frustrated, Doug, in working with people where we'd map out a clear plan to change what they were doing because they were clearly frustrated in what they were doing currently. And then I'd run into them a year later and they hadn't done anything. And I thought, what's up with that? So there's got to be a timeline, not just when everything suits, when it feels right, when the kids graduate from high school or whatever. There's got to be a timeline. So I just threw that in there, 48 days. And wow, it was like somebody threw gasoline on everything I was doing because it was a clear timeline. It was different. It was unique enough to get people's attention, and it's worked like magic for many years.
Yeah, well, I certainly want to dive into the process and talking about that. But I think I was reading your bio, and once you kind of coined this 48 days thing, I think you went to a conference called Mega Book Marketing University, which I'm like, that is the greatest conference name I've ever heard. But you turned this into a book, and you ended up selling over $2 million at the time worth of books. And there's a lot of aspiring authors here. I'm just curious, what did you do that worked? Was it just the name? Did you learn something specific? What advice do you have for aspiring authors who want to, write, sell, and publish a book?
And there's a lot of them out there, aren't there? Authors who want to write and sell. Wow. Well, that particular time, I had just started acknowledging all the requests I was getting from teaching a Sunday school class where people wanted the material that I was talking about, just career life transitions. And people would say, wow, I've got a son-in-law who's been without work for 3 months. I want him to hear what you just talked to us about. What do you have? And I didn't have anything. So I finally, just because of the repeated request, put together just in a 3-ring binder my loose notes. It was not a book. It was not structured like that. Just put it together in the 3-ring binder, put a couple cassettes in there. Of course, we had back in the day. And then I went to the conference, Mega Book University, with Mark Victor Hansen, co-author of Chicken Soup for the Soul. I thought, wow, this guy can maybe teach me a few things about marketing. He's obviously done pretty well, even at that point. This was years ago with Chicken Soup for the Soul. So I went and listened to him talk, and I came back, and in the next 30 months, I sold $2 million worth of that little 3-ring binder that I had. That I had never talked to a publisher, never talked to a library, a bookstore.
Wow.
I just made it available, and people started buying it. Then I had publishers knocking on my door when they saw what was happening, saying, wow, we want to publish this in a traditional trade book. So we finally did that then. And then it went on, of course, very quickly to become a New York Times bestseller. But my encouragement to new authors is don't wait on some deal. Don't wait on getting it perfect. Just start making what you have available for people. And if it's valuable, it'll grow. It doesn't dilute the allure that you've got for a publisher, as an example. Some people think, well, if you sell a lot yourself, publisher's not going to be interested because you've saturated the market. Not at all. I mean, I sold a couple $1 million worth of content, and it did nothing but fuel the fire for when the book itself actually came out to drive that early success.
Wow. That's an incredible story. And one thing I think is interesting is I was researching you, you mentioned someone that they had a nephew or whatever that had been out of work for 3 months and they needed help. But you also found it seemed like a pain point in people that there's just a lot of people in the workforce today that are doing jobs that a lot of people may aspire to, doctors, physicians, pastors, et cetera, but they're just not happy, they're not fulfilled, and they don't feel like they're in that perfect mix that you mentioned of gifting, passion, and money. Can you talk about that pain point, and is that still something you see all the time today?
Absolutely. Yeah, it would seem that if somebody had that kind of illustrious degree, the acronym behind their name, a DDS, a JD, or MD, or whatever it happens to be, PhD, that, wow, obviously they're really successful. But a lot of times those people ended up where they are simply because they had the academic ability to continue in school. Wow. And what I've done then is I encounter those people, 45 years old, who say, you know what, everybody sees me as doing okay, but I think I'm living somebody else's dream. I think I'm living out my parents' expectations or my school teacher's expectations. I don't think this is really it. Now, the irony, Doug, in this is that if somebody goes through college and they get a 4.0, they're going to get invited to medical school and dental school and pharmacology and all those things. Interestingly enough, if somebody has a 2.4, which I had a recent podcast listener attest to this, you don't get those invitations to fancy graduate schools. But in the book, The Millionaire Mind, written by Thomas Stanley, The Millionaire Next Door, he says the average millionaire in America has an average GPA of 2.7, meaning they didn't have the grades to get into graduate school. And guess what? They looked internally for what was a unique opportunity for them and had extraordinary success in doing that. Do we really, I better be careful here, but are you really going to create a unique niche if you're one more attorney, one more doctor, one more teacher, one more dentist? A lot of times those people find themselves just stuck in the sameness with no real unique niche, whereas people who didn't have the academic ability to go on find a really interesting opportunity and do extremely well because it fits them so well.
Yeah. So let's start to talk about the actual 48 days process. Whether someone's listening to this and they're unemployed, maybe like you said, there's someone listening to this in their mid 40s and they're saying, hey, I just resonated completely with what you just said. People think I'm doing well, but I feel like I'm living someone else's dream. Or maybe someone's listening to this and they're a young leader in college and thinking about what they want to do with their lives. Where can they start on this 48-day journey?
Oh, wow. Well, thanks for asking that because, this is where I think I really kind of hit on a nerve in that the process I recommend 85% of the process is looking internally. Mm-hmm. It's not, we got AI, so there's got to be some new opportunities there. Or I know somebody, is really doing well with FBA, fulfilled by Amazon. You look inward first, not externally at where the opportunities are, inward. How has God uniquely gifted you in terms of skills and abilities? How do you relate to other people? What kind of environments are you most comfortable in? How do you manage, persuade, sell? And what are those recurring themes in your values, dreams, and passions? By looking internally, that being 85% of the process, you can get a real clear focus for what's unique about you. 15% of the process then is the application. And frankly, that's the easy part. Once you really understand yourself well, too many people go the first route. They try to emulate somebody else's success and find themselves frustrated in doing that. Look internally, identify those things about yourself. Then you can move forward with confidence.
Yeah, when it comes to looking internally, I know you're a big fan of the DISC assessment. I know that's something that you offer to people and help people. But are there tools, and you can talk about DISC as well, if someone's saying to this, hey, that sounds great, but what does looking inward actually look like? Do I need to take every assessment under the sun? What are some ways people can do that?
I like to take every assessment under the sun, just because each one adds a little bit of information. So I recommend if you have access to the DISC, Strength Finders, the Enneagram, whatever it happens to be, there's so many tools out there and I like them all. They just keep adding little bits in information. You don't have to wait on that. And really, you ought to be able to look at a list of characteristics and kind of self-identify. Am I real outgoing and extroverted? Do I like to be on stage or am I more shy behind the scenes? Do I enjoy working with people, young people, old people? Or do I like working with ideas and technology rather than people? So it's just those kind of clarifications. And in understanding yourself, it's the old Shakespeare thing, know thyself, and to thine own self be true, then thou canst not be false to any man. So understanding yourself is a really, really important part of this. However you do that, if it's working with a coach or counselor or getting feedback from people, going to a workshop, seminar, reading books. Books are the most amazing tool to open up personal understanding and new opportunities that I've ever experienced. They have been by far my greatest guide. And there's so much available. It's just ridiculous not to take advantage of it.
Yeah. And obviously I'd be remiss not to mention that your book, you can get the book 48 Days to the Work You Love. And so I encourage you to get a copy of that. If you don't, we'll include a link to that in the show notes. You talked a lot about looking internally and figuring out what you're gifted at, what you're passionate about. And I know there's a lot of tension today in the career world. Some people say, chase your passion. You can always go find something that you're passionate about. And then other people say, absolutely not. That's not realistic. You can't make a living chasing your passion. What advice do you have for people when it comes to that? Can people truly make a living doing what they're gifted and passionate about? Or do they have to settle for something comfortable to make a living?
Well, I have to be a little careful in this, but I cannot imagine spending the majority of your time doing something that you weren't really passionate about. I just can't imagine trying to talk yourself into doing something just because it's practical and responsible. And we see that played out a lot. I mean, the great artist. Grandma Moses was a wonderful artist, but when she was little, she would draw. And people would go ooh and ah over it. But then they would quickly say, well, that's nice, but you have to do something realistic and practical to make a living. So she did. She was an executive assistant, made very menial wages her entire life. When she was 76, her husband died. And she thought, what do I want to do in the remaining years of my own life here? And she remembered how much she'd enjoyed painting and drawing as a little girl. We're told that her first painting sold for more money than she had generated in her entire working lifetime.
Wow.
And here's that God-given gift that was swept under the carpet because it's not practical or realistic. And I hear so many stories from people like that, artists, musicians, people who say, well, this is what my passion is, but everybody tells me, you're going to be a starving artist. You can't do that. Well, I know artists. I have pieces in my office here from people who are thriving because they figured out how to handle the economic piece of that. Sure, you have to understand business. You can't just do what you do, expect the world to beat a path to your door. But if you understand the principles of selling, of really being in business, do what you're passionate about. My goodness, do that. And I think the success comes a whole lot easier than just trying to do something because you think it's going to be profitable and responsible for providing for your family.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, you mentioned, hey, maybe you could start a business and you have to figure out the business side. And I am curious, we live in a world where it's never been easier to start a business, especially in the areas of passion that you have with all the access we have to technology and tools today. But I am curious, in your experience coaching people through their career, can anyone be an entrepreneur today? Or is entrepreneurship truly something that, some people have and some people don't, and others would be, even maybe in the area of their passion, be better off working for a company that maybe does something that they're passionate about? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, lots of thoughts there. I think anybody can. However, I don't think everybody should. Now, we sometimes think, well, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you got to be that real hard driving, in your face, opinionated, kind of person. No, you don't. You can be very reserved, shy, and introverted and still do extremely well, especially with the opportunities we've got for online businesses today. So it's not a matter of personality style, but it is a matter of personal discipline, accepting responsibility, being decisive to take action. Those are things. I've got a checklist of 18 characteristics that I look for in somebody who can be an entrepreneur. There are some people who feel isolated and lonely as entrepreneurs. They like the camaraderie of being in an office around other people. There are people we have, if you're familiar with Gino Wickman's material on EOS.
Love it.
All right. Entrepreneurial operating systems. He makes a distinction between visionaries and implementers or integrators. There are some people who are really good at coming alongside something that's already moving and just making things work, whereas others are visionaries. So if you're an integrator, boy, hold your head high, come along in a company, be part of what somebody else is doing and do that really well. We need people like that. I need people like that. I don't want everybody to be visionaries in my organization. It'd be a disaster. So we need all of those things. There's not a right or wrong, good or bad. But the cool thing is we get to choose. We get to choose which we want to do and how we're going to make that work.
That's good. My assumption is, are you a visionary more than you are an integrator? Yeah.
Yes.
So talk to people who want to start their own business. So, and just out of curiosity, before I go there, what were you doing before, this whole 48-day phenomenon kicked off?
That happened. I did not take classes in English, lit, and in writing, being an author, college, and never dreamed, never crossed my mind. I never saw that coming. It kind of evolved unexpectedly when I was in my mid 40s. So I did a lot of other things. Now I'll back up to that in a second. But so when that appeared, it kind of surprised me. And all of a sudden I was doing something that I just saw as ministry and service, teaching a Sunday school class. And then people started asking for content. Well, in providing content, okay, but I didn't see myself as an author. I was just simply offering solutions to what they were asking for. That grew and grew. Then when I had publishers knocking on my door saying, hey, we want to take your content and put it into traditional books, I looked at what authors typically do in the United States. We know that 95% of authors in America never make more than $40,000 a year. Wow. As a visionary, as an entrepreneur, as a kid who sees ideas around every bush, that could be really discouraging. But that's not how I saw it. I thought if 95% never make more than $40,000 a year, how tough can it be to put myself in the 5% who do? So I simply looked at what authors are typically doing and I do a whole lot of things that most authors don't do. And it's opened the doors for extraordinary success. Now, backing up a little bit, what was I doing prior to that? I've always been an entrepreneur. I've always just seen ideas and made them work. I had an auto accessories business. sold used cars, had a health and fitness center. I've had a variety of businesses. I've never had a traditional job. I've never had something in place where I was going to get a paycheck on Friday, and get a W-2 at the end of the year, and have a 401k. I've never done that just because I grew up as a farm kid, and I grew up just seeing opportunities where I could sell sweet corn, excess sweet corn out of the family garden, and I could put up a little sign and sell for 30 cents a dozen. I thought, wow, this is amazing. People love what I've got. They give me their money. They're happy with what they got. And I never looked for a job. I'm not saying that's wrong, and I know that's unusual, but I was always just doing entrepreneurial things. So what I'm doing now is just one more example of that. If this whole thing goes away tomorrow, this writing books and speaking, coaching thing, no problem. I'm not going to falter. I'll be on my feet tomorrow because there are 1,000 new ideas that I could approach and move into.
So good. I want you to talk to entrepreneurs, and it can be in the writing space or not. But you mentioned, you had a vision of getting to that 5%. And obviously, clearly, I'm imagining you're still doing this so many years later. So I'm imagining that even if you're not in the top 5%, you've done pretty well. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs who are starting something or in the middle of starting something? Were there one or two key decisions that really helped you scale into that 5%?
There were. And what I encourage them to do is find your uniqueness. There are so many people who are just one more version of something else out there. Now, I'm still known as a career coach. I enjoy that. So if you do a Google search for career coaches, you're going to get 12, 13 million sites. I'm in there somewhere. I'm sure I am. I have no idea where, and it really doesn't matter. But you put in 48 days, just those two things, 48 days, I own the first 2 or 3 pages of Google, not through buying ads or fancy SEO or anything. It's just because that's what distinguishes me. There are a lot of career coaches out there who will help you plan, where you want to go and how you're going to get there and all that. I'm the guy who says, I don't care what your situation is. You can dramatically change the direction of your life and the results you're getting in 48 days if you create a plan and implement it. That has distinguished me and added a whole lot of zeros to my income compared to the average career coach out there.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about that 48-day process. Talk to me about money. So, you mentioned gifting and passion, but money also plays a part in this. What role does money play in this whole thing?
It's like a third leg of a 3-leg stool. Without any of those 3 legs, the stool's going to fall over. So there are a lot of people who are passionate about something, and there are people who have talent at what they're passionate about. But unless they create an economic model, they're dead in the water. I lived in Nashville for 30 years. We saw a whole lot of people, kids come to Nashville because they're passionate about country music. They're very good at it. There are people who are extremely talented who are living in cardboard boxes under bridges because they never figured out what's an economic model here. How can I be the next Taylor Swift or, Nicole Kidman or whoever, or Jason Aldean? We can go through a whole lot of lists. People who have figured out, what am I going to do to create income from my talent? Not just, stand there and sing and hope somebody's going to drop pennies into a cup. No, you need a clearer plan than that. So no matter what it is, if you have passion and talent, but no money, you have a hobby. Don't try to tell me you've got a career or business. You just got a hobby. Go on and do something else. And there's no shame in getting a job somewhere. Most of the waiters and waitresses in Nashville are aspiring singers. They just are doing something to create immediate income. So, but you got to figure it out, and you can figure it out. Just like what I've done with writing, where I talked about most income. My goodness. Here's an example, Doug. So I have New York Times best-selling books. I've written multiple books. I enjoy that, and they've served me very, very well. Last year, when we look at my income and we take the advances I got from publishers and royalties I got from my books out there, those combined generated less than 1% of my income.
Wow.
Less than 1%. People are blown away at that. They think, well, gee, I just get those royalty checks. That allows us to live like we do and go places we go. No, it's because I've created other things that allow people to experience the message of the book. So when I do financial projections, I have zero connected to royalty income. That's just like gravy. I don't have any control over it. What shows up, shows up. But the way I make money is having the books introduce people to other things that we do in 48 days, like being a part, like purchasing a course as an example, or coming to an event, or being part of our 48 Days Eagles community, or being part of our Eagles Elite team where we meet weekly to build your business, or being part of my mastermind, or being part of Eagles Innovation Group where people put in money and I invest it in growing businesses. And we have an opportunity to be an active part of those businesses while they're growing. I mean, those are exciting things. And so there are people, who have spent $100,000 with me, but it's not in buying books. It's by doing other things that help them generate profits, extraordinary profits as well.
Yeah, when it comes to creating those economic models, I think a lot of people just struggle on pricing, like how, especially if you're starting your own business and trying to place a value on you or services that you provide. Do you have any advice there? Is that something that you had to learn and scale over time, or were you pretty savvy at that up front?
I've always enjoyed selling. I mean, even as a little kid, 6 years old, going door to door selling Christmas cards, I really have enjoyed selling. So there's part of that, but you learn how to sell. It's not something you're just born with. You learn how to do that well. I struggled most when I moved from teaching at Sunday school class to for my coaching services. Because what I was doing, I'm an entrepreneur, so I can make money. Don't worry about me. I'm going to be fine. So I was doing other things. But then when I started having people ask for help in the arena that I saw as just community service or even ministry, that was a challenge for me. I thought that was separate. And for me to take what I was doing there, really just serving people well, helping them, and charge for that, that was a philosophical struggle for me. Once I got through that and I saw how people's success was accelerated if they had skin in the game, it helped me understand the principle there to move into that with confidence, where people move their own success more rapidly if they pay for participating in that process rather than trying just to give it to them.
Yeah. Any thoughts on coming up with like a number? And do you have any system for that?
No, and that's going to vary. It's not a matter of just, gee, this is what I want to generate, so I'm going to charge this. It really has to do with who do I want to serve. So if you want to help moms who are on welfare get back into the workforce and generate income, you're not going to charge $200 a session to work with them to do that. It doesn't work based on who you want to serve. Now, you can still make a whole lot of money serving those people. Look at somebody like Dave Ramsey, who's serving people who don't have two nickels to rub together. Well, he's done pretty well with that model, just helping a whole lot of people in small ways, and it still works out. At the same token, if I want to work with physicians and attorneys and CEOs who are used to making $700,000 a year, if I want to work with them and helping them unpack their frustration about where they are and create a clear path, if I charge $20 a session, they're going to take me seriously. So it has to be something in line. I've got a process where I call launching as a leader, where I work with thought leaders. So authors, speakers, leaders in their own entrepreneurial businesses to really become a leader, to leverage their unique skills, intellectual property often, and how they're going to create a lot of wealth in doing that. So I have a one-day process. It's $7,500. That's my most requested process. Now that may sound pretty pricey, but if that person takes what we work on and then they go make $300,000 in the next 6 months, that's a pretty good investment in return. That's what I expect, as a matter of fact. I expect anybody to get a 10 times return in the first 6 months after investing anything with me. So you have to look at, who do I want to serve? Who is the audience that I'm going to work with? What's realistic for that market?
Yeah, you mentioned the people that actually go and do. I did want to ask you about that. You created this 48-day process. You mentioned, you would get frustrated that you'd talk to someone, give them career advice, and come back a year later, and they'd still be in the same spot. I'm sure you have the same experience with people who jump into the 48-day program. What separates people who actually jump in and do the process versus people who don't get the results they desire? Have you seen a constant or a consistent pattern there?
Yes. And it's interesting you frame it as you did, Doug, because years ago, in just experimenting with marketing techniques, I encountered Jay Abraham, the old marketing guru, and he talked about risk reversal. Make it so there's no risk. And so I told my wife we were going to start selling our products with a money back guarantee. If you don't get the results you want in 48 days, just send it back. We'll give you your money back. She thought, she's like, Dan, not everybody is going to be successful. I said, I know, but it's a marketing technique. And I said, watch what happens. We have never reached 0.5% in terms of returns. Because not everybody's going to do it, but they know what happened. They know, gee, I didn't do the work. I didn't create a plan. I didn't implement. And so they don't come back and say, gee, it's Dan's fault. So there's that. But the thing that really separates and the things that comprises the commonality in our communities, our 40 days communities, it's not age, it's not academic background, your GPA, it's not ethnicity, it's not color, it's mindset. People who believe that they can grow, that they can change from where they are into something different in the future. If somebody has a fixed mindset, hey, it is what it is. Gee, the government's in control. I don't have any control for my job. The company's doing this to me. They're not going to be good candidates for what I offer. And fortunately, they're probably not even going to be coming around listening to my podcast or invest in my materials. But if somebody has a growth mindset, it doesn't matter if they're 17 years old or if they're 77, they can rock it.
I love that answer. I want to shift a little bit and talk about mastermind groups. We were just talking before we started recording, you're having a mastermind group come down in Florida and have an experience together, which is amazing. I know you've been a part of masterminds yourself for the majority of your life. What impact have mastermind groups made in your life?
Well, my wife will quickly tell you that having a mastermind is the best thing I've ever done in my life, because as an entrepreneur and being pretty self-directed, I'm very comfortable in solitude. I'm actually energized by solitude. But there's a danger in that I am not connected to other people, and I'm losing the impact of other people's wisdom and influence as well. So having a mastermind is a disciplinary thing for me. To have a mastermind, be connected with other people where we're sharing ideas and resources. So I have, as long as I can remember, been part of masterminds, initiated them myself, been part of others that I'm a part of as well. But that idea of connecting, and like in my mastermind, I don't look for people who are Dan fans. That's not what I want. I want people who have just as much ability to contribute as they have need to receive. So we're peers in that, but we share in ways that escalate everybody's success in ways that surprise even me. I mean, we have people in my mastermind who came in, with a little nonprofit generating $120,000 a year. We changed some of the model that he had, and this year he'll break $1 million in what he's doing, and is now looking at investing. He's one of my investors in our Eagles Innovation Group, and he's looking at other apartment complexes and things to get involved in, teaching his 5 kids. Just dramatic changes like that come out of being part of a mastermind.
Yeah, and I have to ask, I've mentioned that I've had Aaron Walker on the podcast before, and you had the unique opportunity to be in a mastermind group with Aaron and someone that a few people may recognize, the name Dave Ramsey. And I'd just be remiss, those two just make a huge impact. I'm just curious, in your time with them, is there anything that you learned from both of them individually that has significantly contributed to your life and leadership?
Yes. Absolutely. And interestingly, we were just together 3 weeks ago for lunch up in Nashville. I no longer live there, but I shot a note to Dave and I said, hey, I'm going to be in town. Let's get together for lunch. He said, okay. And I said, it'd be interesting to reach out to some of those other guys. We had 12 guys who met every Wednesday morning for 14 years. Wow. Dave and Aaron being 2 of those, and me. So I reached out. Interestingly, one of the guys has passed away. 2 of the guys were out of town, and we had 9 who showed up after all these years ago. It was phenomenal being together.
So cool.
Dave and I met over 30 years ago. We were both absolutely broke and broken and wounded from the stupid mistakes we'd make, crying together, trying to figure out what we were going to do when we grew up and put our big boy panties on. And we did. We figured that out. We mapped it out. And both are very much on track with what we're doing today. But Dave is extremely organized and intentional about the things that he does. So launching, the radio show, and then Financial Peace University, the things that he used to stair step up. And of course, his commitment to doing things all cash. I had the pleasure of walking through his new 2,300 seat state-of-the-art auditorium that he just built, and of course, all cash. But it is phenomenal. It is phenomenal. Wow. Aaron Walker came into that mastermind as a contractor. He was building houses. And I said, geez, man, you ought to be coaching young entrepreneurs. I ain't never been to college. How could I be a coach? I said, people don't care about that. They care about your business acumen. Well, he did. He turned into that. A really interesting story turned into that. And then he leveraged being a podcast guest to really build his audience, borrowed the influence of other people in a very quick time, built what is Iron Sharpens Iron. He now has 13 groups that are full of 12 guys each who are paying, I think, $497 a month. You can do the math on that. He's like, you got to be kidding me. I used to spend a lot of money building a house, wait 6 months and hope I got my money back. Now it's just like out of thin air. Well, it's not. It's by being intentional about having a plan and something clear that you're going to offer to people. Yeah, that's the way you learn from people in a mastermind, though. And we all grew in there. Ken Abraham is in there. He's a ghostwriter. That's what he does. He writes other people's stories, but he's the top of his game. He's $250,000 for writing a book. And at most any time, he has 5 or 6 books in process. But when a celebrity or athlete or politician wants to write a book, they tap him on the shoulder. He writes a book. But we helped each other get to those kinds of extraordinary success that we now all are experiencing.
Yeah. So I guess to encourage our listeners, if someone's listening to this, do you believe that every leader needs to be in a mastermind group and to have a coach? And if yes, do you have any advice for finding one that works for them?
Yes and yes. In the book, Think and Grow Rich, came out in 1937, Napoleon Hill. He interviewed all the top leaders, Henry Ford, Andrew Carnegie, and it goes on and on and on. He did not experience one single person that he interviewed who had extraordinary success, who was not part of a mastermind. Mm-hmm. It just is it's just a common principle for people. Benjamin Franklin started a group when he was 26 years old in Philadelphia called the Junto. They met for over 40 years. And it was that group, and he selected people who were peers of his, but not in the same industries, almost like the Rotary, the original plans for the Rotary to put together people in different industries. But that little group, out of that group came the first paved roads in the United States, the first public library, the first hospital, the first fire protection. All those things they did in their community came out of that little junta, the group of guys that were getting together, sharing ideas and resources and saying, how can we make ourselves better and how can we make our community better? So do I think every leader ought to be in a mastermind? Absolutely. I can't imagine not being with the resources we've got today. Now, to the second period of your question, how do you do that? You can look around. You can ask around if you want to and get referrals for existing groups. And if there's not any, make your own. When Dave Ramsey and I started our group, I said, hey, Dave, let's do this. I said, you invite 5 guys. I'll invite 5 guys. We've got 12. It's a manageable group. And we'll meet together. We just identified what we wanted to have happen in there. And we both invited 5 guys. That was our group. Anybody can do that. Find a friend, say, you invite a few guys, I'll invite a few. And my mastermind today is not all men. About a third are women. I'm not implying that a mastermind has to be guys at all. It's just, again, it has to be people who have the growth mindset that we talked about.
Yeah. I've never asked this question before. But even just listening to you, I remember I had lunch with John Maxwell, which was an incredible experience. And I forget the question I asked him. It was something about making a difference. And he just made this statement that's always stuck with me. He said, Doug, most people don't know how to make a difference. And I was really shocked by that. And I'm just curious, so I've just been trying to study how do people actually make a difference. As I looked at your life and even just listening to the impact that you've had on Dave, how you encouraged Aaron to be a coach of entrepreneurs, how in your life have you found making a difference works?
Be interested. Most people are concerned about being interesting. I was on a website with somebody I was coaching earlier this afternoon. The entire website was about that person. I'm this, I did this, I went to school here, I got these. How does that affect me? Be interested. I mean, you can be considered a great coach, a great friend, a great leader if you simply listen to what people are saying. Ask a couple questions and you'll engage them in meaningful conversation. And that's how it works.
Wow. Simple, but very profound. I want to ask one more question before we dive into the lightning round. I'd be remiss not to. You have, correct me if I'm wrong, at least according to your website, you have 16 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren, which is amazing. My wife and I just had our 4th child in December. So we have 4 kids, 7 and under. And so anytime I can ask someone who's built a great family for parenting advice, I do. So I'll just leave this really open-ended for all of those young parents listening. What advice do you have for us to build a family legacy?
Oh, we need more time than this to do
Round two.
Yeah. There's a quotation by Mark Batterson, who I know you know as well. I've seen him referenced on your website. But He says, an inheritance is what we leave for our children. A legacy is what we leave in our children. I really take that seriously. I'm not as concerned about leaving them resources and houses and wealth. That'll be easily forgotten. But I'm really concerned about the characteristic I help them build. Characteristics like honesty, integrity. Those are things that I value a lot. Doug, you'll see right behind me here, I've got a couple stacks of books there. Those are copies of my son's new book. My son, Kevin, who hosts the podcast, a very successful podcast, Self-Helpful, his first published book, What Drives You? Wow. You have no idea how that makes me feel as a daddy to see a son come out with a book like that. And it's really good. I mean, you think, gee, this is something my kid did, a drawing they brought me because they're 5 years old. What if it's not good? Am I going to tell them it is anyway? Well, I had that kind of moment with the book, but it's really good. I was delighted to write an endorsement for it. But growing kids, the responsibility of parents is, there's a verse in Proverbs that says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, and not depart from it. All parents are familiar with that. And we kind of adapt that sometimes in thinking, well, I'm going to superimpose my desires on them and tell them they need to go to college, they need to focus on this and learn this and that. And those are the people that I see at 45 years old who are saying, I'm living somebody else's dream, not my own. That verse really, in its original context, means train up a child in a way that he or she is bent. Then when they're old, they'll not depart from it. That means children are very individualistic. Your 4 children are very, very different. You can see those differences even by the time they're 7 years old. I'm sure you'll attest to that. Yep. It's helping them embrace that, not to just watch them go down a path that we think is going to be detrimental to them. Certainly not. Or to see them reaching up for a hot stove and just think, well, they got to learn the hard way. No, we guide them, but ultimately we have to see, how is this child really uniquely gifted? Is this person a visionary or an integrator? Is this person going to be better as an entrepreneur, or do they need to go to school and get a degree and to be a worthy physician out there? I mean, there's a lot of paths like that, but the challenge is, as parents, how to figure out individually with our children how they're uniquely gifted and then help them be excellent in that.
So good. Well, with a few minutes we have left, I just want to dive into the lightning round. Just a bunch of fun questions. The first one is, what is the best advice you've ever received, and who gave it to you?
Who gave it to me? Is probably Zig Ziglar, who I met as a young entrepreneur. And I had been raised in a very conservative, legalistic, theological environment. My grandparents were Amish. Our family was conservative Mennonite, where we really were taught to suspect anybody who had money. If you have money, you probably took advantage of somebody else. And here I met this guy who talked openly about his faith and about his desire to make a lot of money and to help you do the same. And he showed me how we create money. We don't take it from somebody else. We create it. But it was Zig Ziglar in that regard. And I really, really value that early advice that I got.
If you could put a quote on a billboard for everyone to read, what would it say?
I'd take the Henry Ford quote. Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right.
I usually ask.
I see that.
Oh, I love that. Go ahead.
I just see that played out. Oh my goodness. People's expectations have so much to do with where they end up with. And ultimately people end up pretty much where they do expect to end up.
Yeah, it all goes back to what you were talking about, that mindset. Do they have a growth mindset or not? So good. I usually ask, you're a huge fan of books. I mean, clearly, if you're watching this, you can see all the books behind you. Although I was listening to one of your podcasts the other day. Rather than asking that, can you just tell people the gift? I think it was your mastermind group, the gift that your mastermind group gave you, specifically Think and Grow Rich. I was nerding out. I'm like, that's so cool. Can you tell people about that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's right here above my head in the shelf behind me. It is an original copy of Think and Grow Rich. Now, that book impacted me a lot just as a teenager, and I've read it over and over and over again. And I used to joke with my wife about the fact that, someday we're going to be wandering through a little used bookstore in Paducah, Kentucky somewhere, and I'm going to see an original copy. I don't think I ever mentioned it to anybody but her, but somehow my mastermind a couple of years ago gifted me with an original copy, and it is pristine. Has the dust jacket. It's in perfect condition. One of the original 5,000 published in 1937. Interesting, Doug, it's got a little flyer inside that says, if you want more copies, just send in $1.50. We'll send it to you. But again, that dates it. Wow. Because that certainly was not. But yes, I value it greatly. If I were a reasonable guy, I'd have it locked up in a safe somewhere, but I don't want it there. I want it right here where I can touch it and see it every morning when I walk into my office and share it with other people as well.
Yeah, I know a lot of people listening to this, and clearly a lot of people that I've interviewed have also mentioned Think and Grow Rich and the impact. And so I'm sure a lot of people are listening to this right now and saying, how can I get one of those 5,000 copies? You get to spend time with a lot of great leaders. We talked about Aaron Walker, Dave Ramsey, et cetera. But I'm curious, when you get to spend time with a great leader that you look up to and admire, do you have a go-to question or two that you always ask when you get time with them?
I do get a lot of opportunities for that. We were just back up in Nashville, and Joy and I had the privilege of staying with our dear friends, Michael and Gail Hyatt. Wow. So he's certainly one of those, but there are others out there. And I like to ask them, what are you excited about right now? And they just share what they're working on. They're going to share new opportunities they're seeing, where technology has taken us. And so I just ask that question, just shut up and listen. And I learn a lot by doing so.
Yeah. So what are you excited about?
What am I excited about?
Yeah.
I never keep things the same. I'm doing some things right now I shared on my podcast just this week that I'm doing to change, because I don't want to look over my shoulder and see that I'm doing the same things I was doing 20 years ago or 3 years ago or 1 year ago. Wow. And I think a lot of times people right now, they confuse loyalty or commitment with stagnation and sameness.
Wow.
Now, this is not just to break things that aren't broken, but things are changing so rapidly that if we aren't changing as well, we're going to be being left behind. I mean, if we're doing things the same way we were doing them a year ago, chances are you're being left behind. So don't confuse loyalty with stagnation or complacency.
So good. What's your biggest leadership pet peeve?
Biggest leadership pet peeve is I see people who, with a little bit of success, are very quickly inaccessible to the people who help them get there. That's a pet peeve of mine.
Come on.
Oh,
that'll preach.
I see people who, wow, all of a sudden, and people, I just spoke at a conference recently, and I see people who are speakers who come in from the side stage, at the moment they're introduced. They do their 40 minutes of wow and scoot off the side, never to be seen again. If I go to a conference, I'm going to hang out for the 2 days of the conference, sit in the room, take notes. I learned from people like Mark Victor Hansen, who had extreme success. I go to one of his conferences. He's sitting in the back of the room taking notes. Man, he's asking the speakers questions. He's learning from them. I thought, I never want to lose that quality. And so I want to be, I don't want to fall into that category where, no, Dan's too important now. He can't talk to the guy who's a greeter at Walmart anymore. He's beyond that. Nope. I don't want that to be the case. I love connecting with people who have great potential. My mission statement says that I work with high potential individuals, and it goes on from there. Well, guess what? A high potential individual doesn't mean that somebody's already having extraordinary success. That can be the kid who's making $10 an hour somewhere, the kid who's parking my car at a restaurant we're going to tonight. High potential. It can be somebody who just got out of prison yesterday. They've been there for 20 years and now they're out. But I met with a lady not too long ago who was in that situation, 53 years old, been in prison for 20 years. And my wife wanted me to meet with her. I'm like, oh man, are you serious? I'm so good. No, I want you to meet with her. My wife is really good at selecting winners, but I did. And this lady said, Dan, I'm not looking for a handout. I'm looking for a hand up.
Wow.
We got her a sewing machine. She's doing upholstery work, does beautiful work, and she is thriving. She's on her way. Wow. I love connecting with somebody like that, as well as the John Maxwells of the world, somebody who's already doing pretty well.
No, I love that so much. As you were sharing that, I was thinking of two men in my life who were Dan Millers to me in that way, and just saw me when they saw high potential when probably no one else in the world did, and they invested in me, and it's the only reason I'm here today. So thank you for that, Hart. A few more questions. I don't know if you have an actual bucket list or not, but if you do, what's something you've done in your life that you think everyone should experience before they die?
I don't really have a lot of things on a bucket list that are left undone. I've done pretty much everything I ever desired to do. Now, that doesn't include, jumping out of an airplane or bungee jumping off a bridge. There's some things that I just don't have a desire to do. So it's not like I'm forcing myself to do things and just scare the fire out of me or anything. But I've done a lot of things that I just had a desire, and I just simply moved into them because they weren't that difficult to approach. So I don't have anything really left undone. And I'm not sure that I have anything that's just a cookie cutter thing that I think everybody ought to do. I think people ought to read great books. I mean, I've got a list of books that I think every teenager ought to read by the time they're 13, because I think it's so transformative in opening the door to things that you can do later. Books like Think and Grow Rich, books like The Magic of Thinking Big, books like Zig Ziglar, CEO at the Top. I mean, those are things, books, the Dale Carnegie Classic, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Those are just foundational pieces. No matter what direction somebody's going to go in their own success path, those are just foundational pieces that I think they ought to have in place.
If you could go back and have coffee with yourself at any age, and you would have actually listened to yourself, what age would that be, and what would have you told that version of Dan?
I have to think about when I was perhaps 18, just starting college, breaking away from the farm life and kind of charting my own course for the first time without a lot of boundaries around it. And what I would have, sometimes when this question is asked, I think the expectation is that I would warn Dan about avoiding all the things that were mistakes along the way. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that at all. Those things that were down points in my own career path were learning experiences. I don't know how I could have gotten to where I am today without going through those. So wouldn't want to know a way to avoid those. I would just simply tell that 18-year-old Dan Miller, man, get ready for the ride of your life. Hang on. It's going to be great.
Let's go. I love that. And then lastly, at the other end of your life, we talked about legacy with your grandchildren and kids. What do you want to be remembered for? What do you want your legacy to be?
Yeah, there's a lot of things out there that will have kind of a long-term ripple effect. I mean, it's funny, my kids finally realized, they're going to continue to get royalties in my books long after I'm gone. My books will outlive me, and that's kind of cool. But that's a minor point. What I really want to be known for is that compassionate, understanding, encouraging daddy and papa to my kids. I mean, I know that I've had the privilege of being connected to a lot of people in a lot of ways, but it's really my kids and grandkids that are my legacy. I want them to carry on with honor, not just carry on what I'm doing, but to do what they're doing with integrity and honor and be a light in the world as well.
Anything else you want to leave leaders with today?
No, man, you've got great questions. We covered a lot here. I hope we've stimulated some thinking for some people in terms of how they can increase their impact, influence, have friends for life, anything that they want to increase in those areas. And those seem to be pretty common where people want to increase their impact, influence, and income. So hopefully we've created some markers for them to be able to do that.
Yeah, I love the conversation, Dan. Thank you for adding value to me and everyone who will listen to this, and keep making a difference.
Thanks so much, Doug.
Well, leader, thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Dan. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can find ways to connect with him and links to everything that we discussed in the show notes at l3leadership.org/386. And as always, leader, I want to challenge you that if you want to 10x your growth this year, then you need to either launch or join an L3 Leadership Mastermind Group. Mastermind groups are simply groups of 6 to 12 leaders that meet together on a consistent basis for at least 1 year in order to help each other grow, hold each other accountable, and to do life together. For me personally, mastermind groups have been the greatest source of growth in my life over the last 8 years. So if you're interested in learning more about launching or joining a group, go to l3leadership.org/masterminds or email me at dougsmith@l3leadership.org. And as always, I like to end every episode with a quote, and today I'll quote Jim Rohn, who said this. He said, "Success is nothing more than a few simple disciplines practiced every day." Come on, Jim. Well, leader, I hope you enjoyed the episode. Know that my wife Laura and I love you. We believe in you, and I say it every episode, but don't quit. Keep leading. The world desperately needs your leadership. We'll talk to you next episode.